She was only the gate clerk until a code word stopped a massacre. Nora Levin's badge said access control in block letters that made her sound like a locked door. Most days, she was a human checklist. Scan ID, confirm clearance, match faces, wave the world through the narrow throat of forward operating base miles. She kept a pencil behind her ear and a notebook in her pocket because computers failed and pencil never argued. The Marines called her ma'am the same way they called the weather sir. Out of habit, not hierarchy. On the gate, hierarchy wore a different uniform anyway, procedure. She believed in procedure the way religious people believe in the sun. Not because it loves you, but because it rises. Procedures didn't miss birthdays, didn't get bored. They caught what people didn't. She had learned that in a different life at an airport, where a single sleepy yes could deliver the wrong passenger to a metal sky. Out here, the sky was a different kind of metal and the passengers had rifles, but the math felt familiar. The safest sentence is the one you can prove. Dawn rolled over the valley like a slow spill of brass. The line at the gate was already a necklace of vehicles blinking turn signals into dust. Contractor pickups with ladders in their beds, fuel bozers that made everyone nervous, an ambulance that was either in a hurry or practicing. The guard booth smelled like old coffee and new paper. The barrier poles were white with orange bands, cheerful as lifeguards who had seen too much. An MP corporal worked the outer lane with a mirror on a pole, checking wheel wells and the undersides where cleverness hides. The sergeant of the guard stood back a pace, scanning not the trucks but the air around them, the way a man reads a crowd by the space between bodies. Nora worked the scanner with muscle memory. Morning. Badge. Remove hat. Look straight into the camera. Thank you. She watched hands more than faces. Hands lied less. A fidgeting thumb over a forged laminate had a rhythm to it she could hear. A contractor tried to make a joke about her being the only thing between him and a hot breakfast. She made a non-committal sound that meant exactly what it sounded like. Not today. At 7:31, the radio in the booth crackled. Incoming VIP convoy from Victor 6, Ops said. ETA 5 mics. Priority route, keep lanes clear. The sergeant gave Nora a look that held both trust and the kind of warning reserved for people who take pride in being careful. Priority convoys were like weather fronts. They changed the rules without asking. Nora pulled the binder with the day's authorizations. The convoy's manifest was already stamped and signed. For armored SUVs, 1 lead, 1 trail, 2 in the middle with the important meat inside. The names were familiar in the way names become when you file them often enough. A colonel who liked to wink at his own jokes. A civilian from somewhere higher who wore confidence like immunity. The sheet said 10 passengers, 6 close protection for drivers. She wrote the numbers again by hand because handwriting makes numbers belong to you. The first hint came soft, like a thread tug. A contractor in a dusty Hilux rolled up and handed over a badge that had been wiped too clean. The barcode scanned, the photo matched, the chip chirped cooperative. But the laminate's edge had a proud seam where there should have been a smooth kiss. You get this reissued? She asked casually. He shrugged. Wash my pants, he said, which was not an answer and exactly the kind most people give. She flipped the badge and saw the microprint along the edge read access. Control, AUTH instead of access, control, authorize. A factory error could do that. A printer that lost a layer could do it, too. She marked the back of his day pass with a dot only she used, sent him to secondary, and watched in the mirror as the corporal took his time with the mirror pole. She reset her face to neutral as the convoy arrived. A dust cloud, then lights like small suns. The lead SUV nosed to the stop line, engine idling like a tiger. The driver's window came down exactly 4 inches. A man in shades held out a stack of badges like a magician performing a trick he was bored with. Convoy Golf 4, he said, his tone already 2 steps into the bass. Priority clearance. Morning, Nora said. Badges 1 at a time, please. He sighed the way men sigh when the world fails to recognize their urgency. He handed her the first badge. Everything about it was fine. The chip chirped. The barcode scanned. The face matched. The hologram did its polite shimmer when she tilted it. She held it anyway. Please remove your sunglasses, she said. He pulled them down just enough to show compliance without surrender. She matched iris color to the photo. Close enough to pass on a busy day. Today was busy. Busy wasn't the point. She flipped the badge. The microprint was correct. The laminate was flush. The corner carried a faint scuff she would have believed at midnight. At dawn, it felt rehearsed. She handed it back with a nod. Next, the second badge stuck to her palm in a way plastic shouldn't. The third had a barely misaligned punch in the lanyard hole. The fourth, her pulse did the smallest, best kind of skip. Along the bottom where the contract printer had pressed out one too many sheets, the faintest ridge. Not enough to fail. Enough to say, these were made together, fast, by a machine that didn't know it should be ashamed. Ops to gate, the radio hissed. Convoy Gulf 4, priority. Keep them moving. We've got a QRF shaking out behind them. The sergeant made a rolling motion with his palm. Nora pretended not to see it. She asked the driver to turn his head left, then right. He did it military clean, jaw clenched against time. In the back seat, a man in a suit watched her with an expression that expected cooperation. Beside him, another man checked his watch like a metronome for annoyance. The suit leaned forward. "We're late," he said. His voice had the gentle condescension of someone who thinks he's on the same team as the rules, but outranks the people who carry them. Nora smiled in the way people do when they'd like to be more liked than they are. She reached for the handheld and keyed the mic. Ops, gate. Confirm convoy code word for the day. Procedures nested inside procedures. Convoys had code words the gate was supposed to ask for only when things felt wrong or ops forgot to send the update. It was a sanity check, a tripwire for complacency. Ops replied without pause, reading a line from a screen. Code word Sapphire. The man in the back seat nodded, preemptively pleased. The driver looked bored, which is to say he looked like a driver. Nora clicked to the second channel, the one Ops wasn't watching, the one only the guard force used to grouse about coffee. "Sarge," she said quietly, "tell me the code word you told First Squad at 0600. The sergeant's answer came without thinking. "Granite. We flipped it at 05. "What?" Nora didn't answer. She looked into the back seat at a man who had prepared the right lie for the wrong audience. She let her smile flatten. "Say it again," she asked, as if she were hard of hearing. The suit's mouth made a shape that expected to be done making shapes very soon. "Sapphire," he said. The word hung in the booth like a fly over soup. She held up a single finger to the driver. "Wait." The driver did not wait. The SUV crept forward a foot, then two. The barrier arm was still down. The driver stopped before it kissed his hood because people are good at stopping when pain is at stake. The suit's eyes went dark. "Gate." Ops snapped on the main net, irritated now. "Clear Gulf 4. They're ours." Nora kept her thumb off the transmit button. She could hear her father's voice from years ago, teaching her chess with bottle caps. Sometimes the best move looks rude. She leaned out of the booth and made her voice small and polite, the pitch that gets men to underestimate their own fear. "Sir, would you mind stepping out?" She said it to the driver, which is really to say she said it to the back seat. The driver glanced at the suit, got a shrug, and killed the engine. He stepped out slowly, the way people do when they want to telegraph that they are indulging you. The sergeant of the guard had already started walking over. His hand hovered near his pistol in a way that was not a threat. Not yet, just an admission that hands sometimes matter. Behind him, the corporal with the mirror pole drifted toward the SUV's rear axle, where people hide the worst truths about themselves. Nora took badge number 5. The man in the back seat passed it forward without looking, like a king flicking extra coins to a lesser god. The chip chirped good morning. The barcode made its neat beep. The photo matched, mostly. The eyes were right. The jawline, too. But the ears, she'd learned this by accident. Airport again. A man who'd swapped IDs with his cousin. Everything matched except the way ears are their own fingerprints. In the photo, the right ear's upper ridge dipped slightly. The man in the back seat had the clean, factory curve of a perfect helix. People plan for eyes. They don't plan for ears. She wrote ER in pencil on her palm. She handed the badge back. "All right," she said, bright again. "Code word, please." The suit exhaled through his nose. "Sapphire," he said, letting his gaze slide to the sergeant as if to enlist a higher ally. The sergeant didn't blink. Nora nodded like she had just solved a small crossword clue and, with the same movement, reached under the counter and thumbed the switch that dropped the steel teeth behind the lead SUV. The driver heard them clank up and went very still. The suit leaned forward. "What are you doing?" he asked, tone new now, something nasty waking behind it. "Secondary screen," Nora said. as if that were the explanation and apology both. She lifted the hand that meant, "Please reverse." The driver didn't. The suit opened his mouth again. On the far lane, the Hilux with the too clean badge revved. The corporal shifted his mirror. The sergeant, bless him, did not turn to look. Nora kept her body square to the SUV in front of her and counted the beats between the suit's blink and the driver's jaw tightening. The gaps were wrong. Rehearsed patience smells different from real patience. The radio in the booth popped. Ops loud. "Gate, what's the holdup?" Nora did not answer. She switched to the guardnet. "Sarge, I need the pop-up bollards now." Her voice was calm in the way her mother's was when she scraped skin off a knee and said, "This will sting," and meant, "This will save you later." The sergeant didn't ask why. He stabbed a button on his remote. Steel cylinders rose out of the tarmac with hydraulic dignity, hemming the SUV in front and behind. The driver took his hands off the wheel the way men do when they want to be photographed obeying. In the back seat, the suit stopped pretending to be human and turned into something colder, a manager of outcomes. "Everyone stay very still," Nora said. Her tone so ordinary it made the words feel like a breakfast reminder. On the other side of the lane, the Hilux chose a new plan. It lurched hard right, trying to mount the curb and ride the shoulder past the formalities. The corporal jumped sideways. The mirror pole bounced. The Hilux's front wheel hit the concrete barrier, hopped, stuck for a second, then spun angry. That much panic in the second lane clarified the first. If this were nothing, both would be nothing. If this were something, both would howl. "Sarge," Nora said quietly, "this convoy is dirty." He exhaled, not surprised. "You sure?" She could say ears and laminates and code words, and the way fear sits in the throat like a change in weather. She could say none of those are admissible, but all of them are true. Instead, she said, "Yes." He nodded once. "On me." He stepped to the driver's door, hand open, voice polite to the edge of prophecy. "Sir, hands where I can see them. Slowly step out." The driver obeyed. Drivers always obey until they don't. The back door opened. The suit stepped out into the dawn, jacket neat, tie straight, face carrying a smile he must have practiced on calmer days. "There's been a mistake," he said. "Call ops. They'll clear this up." The sergeant tipped his head toward Nora. The suit followed the gesture, saw her, and understood the shape of his day. "You," he said, with a pleasantness that wanted to be menace, "are exceeding your authority." Nora felt, absurdly, like laughing. Exceeding authority was exactly what authority is for, she thought, when its point is to keep people alive. Out loud she said, "Please place your hands on the hood." The suit didn't. The driver flinched, half-hearted, and she saw the motion ripple, back seat right hand dipping, jacket shifting. The sergeant saw it, too. "Gun," he barked, and time snapped. "Hands. Weapons," shouted words that sounded like the old ones, but with the safety off. The suit moved halfway and then, realizing the game had changed before he had chosen a team, pivoted to the only plan cowards ever have: escalate. Before the first shot, Nora was already moving. Not running. Moving, the way a chess piece becomes a different piece when it crosses the board. She pivoted into the booth, hit the shutter, killed the lane lights, grabbed the hand mic, and pushed the phrase that ends arguments. "Gate in lockdown. Breach attempt. 2 vehicles." The world contracted to the square in front of her. The sergeant shoved the driver into the fender and pinned him there with a forearm made for pinning. The suit reached into his jacket and came up with something that glittered wrong. He didn't get to use it. The corporal, young, dumb, brilliant, hit him low like a linebacker. The thing, knife, maybe, not a gun, skittered under the SUV. The second vehicle in the convoy tried to edge around and learned that bollards do not negotiate. Nora's hands were steady. She had not expected that. She used them both, one to key a panic plate that dropped the heavy barrier behind the whole lane, one to yank open the top drawer where the rubber mallet lived. She didn't need a mallet. It made her feel better to have it anyway. Over the next minute, a dozen things happened at once. The QRF came boiling down the access road like an answer. The Hilux coughed itself into surrender under the corporal's boot. The suit made a decision to stop losing gracefully and tried to make it everyone else's problem. He failed. People who rehearse authority have a hard time when the rehearsal ends. Nora did not crow. She did not gloat. She felt tired so suddenly, it was like stepping into a hole in the ground. The sergeant cuffed the driver, then the suit, then the two men in the middle SUV who had waited until now to remember they were brave. The MPs kept their weapons pointed at the places fear comes from. Ops arrived full of adrenaline and late questions. The colonel in the third vehicle, who had been either a passenger to his morning or complicit in someone else's, stepped out with his hands raised to shoulder level and a face that had learned humility just now. He said nothing. Good. Nora slid the booth window up and let the dawn in. It smelled like dust and a day that would be written down. The sergeant walked over and put both hands on the counter the way old men lean on fences. He didn't smile. He said, "You bought us a Tuesday." She shrugged because her throat had become unreliable. Code word was wrong, she said. Ears didn't match. Laminates felt like cousins, not brothers. She felt silly, like a magician trying to confess the trick was practice and sweat. He nodded. "I'll take the paperwork," he said. "You take 10 minutes." She took 3, splashed water on her face in the staff restroom, looked at herself in the mirror, and thought, "You don't look like a hero." Then she laughed out loud because she had never wanted to look like one, and because the word hero made her skin feel borrowed. When she came back, the world was already rebuilding its fiction. Ops was explaining to Ops that the convoy had failed a minor verification check. The colonel was explaining to no one that he had trusted a schedule too much. The suit had ceased to be a suit. He was evidence now, an object people moved with blue gloves and sternness. The second lane reopened. The barrier poles lifted their innocent stripes again. Nora picked up her scanner, put the pencil behind her ear, and returned to the work that had always felt like breathing. Morning. Badge. Remove hat. Look straight into the camera. Thank you. By 8:12, the valley had decided to remember how to be morning. By 8:19, a woman in a contractor van with a baby seat in the back handed Nora a donut in a napkin with no comment. By 8:23, the QRF leader, sweat drying on his temples, smile that looked like a confession, said quietly, "Nice catch." She nodded, because some compliments you keep small so they fit in your pocket without falling out. What she did not know yet, could not know, was that the thing with the wrong ears had been step 1. Convoys, like bacteria, sometimes travel in pairs. While the MPs processed fingerprints and the QRF reset the lane, a second set of vehicles waited in the dust at the far turn, engines idling. Men inside looking at their watches and then at each other, trying to decide whether the plan had died or merely stalled. Somewhere on a phone that didn't exist, someone said, "Proceed." The second plan did not come in through the gate. It came over it. Nora heard the first rotor before she understood it. A low, angry whine. Not the base's birds. Not friendly, too small, too private. She had seen hobby drones at the PX, flirted with the idea of buying one for her niece's birthday. This sound was that sound's older brother with a record. The sergeant heard it, too. He looked up. The corporal with the mirror pole had his pole, which is to say he had nothing. The drone came in fast and low, a black insect with more rotors than seemed polite. It hopped the fence like a rumor. It carried something in its belly that looked like a fist-sized cooler. Men are slow until they aren't. The sergeant had his pistol out in a way that reminded everyone why the pistol exists. He fired twice. He missed. Hard to hit a bee with a brick. Nora moved without thinking. Procedures for drones existed. She had signed the binder that said she had read them. They were written by good people in quiet rooms and had ideas about nets and RF guns and local jammers and cabinets with locks. The net was somewhere else. The RF gun was with the platoon that had borrowed it for a demo for the colonel, who was now handcuffed to his morning. The jammer cabinet was locked and the key on a ring in a pocket 2 pockets away. The drone banked toward the booths, decided it preferred the fuel Bowser, changed its mind again. Panic does that to pilots. Nora grabbed the only thing in reach that could alter an equation, the red-lensed wand the MPs used to wave cars at night. She climbed onto the booth counter and, with a sound that was half prayer and half curse, jumped. She did not touch the drone. She didn't have to. She touched the line it didn't know it was following, the line between intent and attention. The wand smacked it out of its neat arc, clipped a rotor, sent it wobbling. The sergeant's third shot found it while it argued with gravity. It dropped like a dead thought and landed 10 feet from the fuel Bowser, thunking on hot dirt, its little cooler belly crumpling. Everyone exhaled. Everyone said a word their mothers would have forgiven. The corporal ran and kicked it like it owed rent. It didn't move. It didn't explode. It sat there, offended at dying. Nora landed badly, skinned a knee, felt the heat of embarrassment more than pain. The sergeant holstered slowly, like putting anger back on a shelf. He looked at her the way men look at people who refuse to wait their turn to be brave. "You make a habit of this?" he asked. She shook her head. "I prefer pencils," she said. And the laugh that moved through the lane this time was the kind that cuts a wire in fear and throws the breaker on dread. They were not done. The second convoy, which was not a convoy, which was a pair of pickups with tarps that hid a ladder and a rifle on a bipod, decided the time for subtlety had been stolen. They gunned along the outer fence line where the wall curved and put the ladder up like a bad idea with good shoes. They threw a sandbag over the razor wire and made new math. The first man crested and saw a lane full of people who had chosen a morning. He chose a different one and raised his weapon. Nora, who had never fired anything more serious than a nail gun, reached for the thing she did know. The console that controlled the pop-up bollards also controlled the deadman bar that could drop the K-rail along the outer lane and turn a straight line into a maze. She hit it. The barriers thunked down with the satisfying authority of, "Not today." The rifleman fell backward into his friends and swore in a language anger shares with everyone. The QRF's first truck slid sideways into the curve, doors already opening, men already moving the way only drilling teaches. Someone yelled, "Flashbang," and someone else threw the kind of answer that convinces questions to leave. Nora watched from the shadow of the booth, heart hammering a tempo she would remember later as the drumbeat of a decision not to let the day be written by the wrong author. She looked at the suit in cuffs, at the drone dying like a toy, at the men on the ladder learning something about ladders and plans, and felt a sentence rise up that had nothing to do with procedure and everything to do with promise. "Not on my lane." The smell of burned powder lives in the nose longer than memory. Nora hated that fact as she keyed the intercom and moved the gate from lock to fight. The QRF flowed like water over stone, containing, compressing, clearing. The ladder clattered down. A bad idea turned into aluminum again. The pickups tried to reverse into wisdom and found steel where air had been. K-rail, jersey barriers, tires looking for grace. The world narrowed to voices and angles. Ops finally arrived in the lane in person, a captain with a line of sweat cutting through the dust on his cheek. "Status," he said to the sergeant, already knowing enough not to ask Nora to summarize her own courage. The sergeant didn't point. He reported, "Fake convoy neutralized, unknown number detained. Second element attempted fence breach, stopped. One drone shot down, possible payload intact." He hesitated a quarter beat, because humility is also a weapon. Gate clerk initiated lock and barriers, identified code mismatch. The captain looked at Nora. The expression that passed across his face was complicated, pride tangled up with the bureaucratic dread of the paperwork required to honor pride. "You good?" he asked. "Better," she said, and only then felt her knee complain about the jump. She sat for the first time in a long 5 minutes and put her shaking hands flat on the desk until the shakes belonged to her again. Yodi came in a suit like a moon man and knelt over the dead drone with a tenderness people reserve for sleeping dogs. He x-rayed the belly, frowned, opened it like a gift. Inside, not C4, not a grenade, a thick glass jar of red powder taped to a threaded cap, a spring, and a battery with an attitude. "Thermite," he said over the radio, and everyone looked involuntarily toward the fuel bowser, as if relief could be earned retroactively. Thermite doesn't explode. It eats. It would have eaten into the belly of a fuel truck like a story into a rumor. The lane would have become a photograph with names around it. Ops took the suit and his protectors away to a room with a table that would hear too much. The colonel kept quiet because sometimes the best use of rank is to stop adding nouns to a sentence. The fake convoy's drivers discovered that plastic cuffs get tighter when men struggle with their pride. The MPs never raised their voices. Nora returned to her binder. She flipped to the page where Golf 4's authorizations had been printed in ink that now felt like a conspiracy. She circled the signature. She drew an arrow to the timestamp and wrote Sapphire under it, not because the question needed asking, but because documentation is a kind of mercy. It keeps liars from surviving long in the wild. The rest of the morning tried hard to be ordinary. Ordinary came and went in waves. The line of vehicles moved again. The corporal recovered his mirror pole from where it had learned to be a spear. Someone replaced the red-lensed wand because it now bent at an angle that said, heroic, but retired. The sergeant tolerated 2 jokes about drones and swatted the third with a look. Around 10 o'clock, the captain came back. He didn't come alone. With him was the base commander, a full bird with gray at the temples, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has learned in the last hour what trust costs. He stood where the suit had stood and didn't pretend to be taller than he was. "Ms. Levin," he said, "walk me through your decision tree." She did. Not the hero version, the pencil version. The badge edges. The ears. The code word from the wrong channel. The feeling in the chest that isn't superstition but the mind completing a pattern faster than words can. The commander listened. When she finished, he nodded as if she had recited the creed of a small, serious religion. "You exceeded your authority," he said, and she waited for the second clause that would ruin the first. It didn't come. "Good," he said. "Do it again when you have to." He turned to the sergeant. "And you?" The sergeant shrugged. "I chose to believe my clerk," he said. The commander grunted. "Then I chose the right sergeant." They could have done a ceremony then. They did not. The commander did the only thing that mattered. He stood in the lane, took off his cover, and saluted Nora. It wasn't theatrical. It was short and exact and aimed. The MPs followed, awkwardly elegant in the way men are when respect moves faster than training. Drivers in line, seeing something worth stopping for, put their vehicles in park and watched. A contractor clapped twice, realized the mood, and put his hands in his pockets instead. Nora did not return the salute. She put her hand flat on the counter, the way you do when the ground moves and you need to be in touch with something that will not. The commander seemed to like that better. In the afternoon, the interrogations started telling their own story. The suit was not a suit. He was a facilitator with a borrowed badge and a voice that liked to be obeyed. He had a cousin in the print shop off base, a cousin whose printer had made the laminates that felt like cousins rather than brothers. The code word leak had come from a late-night phone left face up on a desk in ops while a good man went to get coffee. The drone had been flown by a kid who once fixed radios and now fixed human courage with fear. None of that changed what had happened at the gate. It made the paperwork longer and the lessons shorter. By evening, new procedures lived in 3 binders and the server that hated being updated. The code word would now rotate by the hour and be distributed by hands, not channels. The RF gun would live on a hook inside the booth, keyed to Nora's ring. The jammer cabinet's key would live on the sergeant's neck until someone else earned the right to carry it. The mirror pole would get a friend, a collapsible net with lead seams. The fuel bowser would park 10 meters farther from temptation. Small changes, cheap. They felt like locks turning. Days later, the colonel returned in a convoy that was actually a convoy. He walked the lane before he drove it. He stopped at Nora's window and cleared his throat the way men do when they're about to thank someone for embarrassing them into being alive. "I listened to the recording," he said. "Your voice didn't shake." "I got lucky," she replied. It was a lie. She had prepared for years to be lucky. He set a small box on the counter. She didn't open it. She knew what lived inside boxes that size. Coins with eagles, a ribbon that would one day live in a drawer, words engraved in metal that would never pay rent. "Sir," she said, "give that to the corporal with the mirror pole." He blinked. "He hit the knife," she added. "I hit the panic plate." He hit the knife. The colonel looked at the sergeant, who nodded once. The colonel took the box back without offense. "We can get 2 coins," he said, and made it true. Nora's mother called that night because mothers hear stories before they become news. "Are you safe?" she asked. Nora looked at her hands and said, "Today, yes." Her mother sighed the sigh of a woman whose child has chosen a life where yes is the highest answer. "Eat," she ordered. "Drink water. And stop catching drones." "I'll try," Nora said, and meant it, and knew she would fail with honor if asked again. The days that followed tried on normal again. Normal fit badly at first, then found new seams. The gate learned a new rhythm. People stood a little farther from the fuel bowser without being asked. The RF gun looked ugly and perfect on its hook. The code words were stupid on purpose: ladle, thunder, sparrow, so that men would have to write them on their hands and thus remember them with their skin. When Nora heard sparrow on the wrong channel, she smiled because her pencil had already written the correction on the morning's page. 2 weeks later, a message arrived from a base across the province. Their gate had heard about the wrong ears and the right pencil. They had caught their own fake convoy that morning. A badge with the microprint cut off a letter, a code word that had been yesterday's. The clerk who caught it signed her email with a name and then a line Nora copied into her notebook because it was a prayer disguised as a procedure. We do not stop cars. We stop stories. On a Friday, the commander called everyone who had a part in the morning into a room that smelled like coffee and old decisions. He had the coin for the corporal, a certificate for the sergeant, and, for Nora, a laminated card with exactly 9 extra words. At this gate, her procedure is authority when seconds matter. It meant nothing outside the fence and everything inside it. She tucked it behind her badge where only she would see it when she clipped in at 6:59 and unclipped at 18:03. The sergeant, who had the timing of a man who knows where humor lives without stepping on its tail, waited until the commander left and then leaned on the table. "You know what they say about you now?" he asked. She braced for something she'd have to ignore. "No rank, no orders," she guessed, half smiling. He shook his head. "Better. If the ears don't match, ask Nora." She laughed, because survival deserves laughter, and because the phrase was stupid in a way that would outlive the people who made it. The corporal, whose mirror pole had a new nickname, Spear, held up his coin and said, "I'm buying coffee with this." Everyone told him he was an idiot. He grinned anyway. Months later, when the valley had changed commanders and the binder had become a PDF nobody read without pen and coffee because the copier jammed every third page, an inspector from somewhere arrived with a checklist and a hat that made his forehead sweat. He asked Nora to explain how a civilian clerk had ended a 2-pronged penetration attempt with a wand and a word. She thought about code words and ears and drones, and the moment a pistol becomes the opposite of theater. She thought about how procedures are a promise you make to strangers, and how sometimes you have to exceed them to keep the promise. "Attention is policy," she said simply. The inspector wrote it down like a quote he would use later. When she walked back to the lane that afternoon, a driver in a van with a ladder in the back held up a bag from the bakery in town. "For the lady who keeps us boring," he said, and drove on. She shared the bag with the sergeant and the corporal and wrote ER in pencil on her palm anyway, because boredom is earned and fragile. On the anniversary, the commander, he had new gray and a new scar on his knuckle from an argument with a stubborn door, came to the gate without an entourage. He didn't bring a coin. He didn't bring words. He stood at the same spot in the lane where the suit had tried to turn language into violence. He took off his cover and saluted the booth. It was either the silliest thing Nora had ever seen or the truest. Maybe both. She returned to scanning badges. The pencil behind her ear had teeth marks from thinking too hard. The wand hung straight now, replaced, ready, ridiculous. The RF gun's case had a scuff on it from the day the corporal tripped and swore and made everyone feel human again. The binder had coffee on it shaped like a country that didn't exist. A contractor in a fresh polo handed over a badge with a laminate just proud of perfect. She smiled, put a dot on his day pass, and sent him to secondary without a speech. He would be fine, or he wouldn't. The point of the lane was that it would decide. As the sun slid down the wire, Ops radioed the code word for the evening in a voice that pretended radio was still a good idea. The sergeant repeated it to his squad with the affection men reserve for dumb phrases that keep them alive. The corporal drew it on his glove with a Sharpie. He swore he would return and never did. Nora wrote it in pencil on her palm and then rubbed it off on her jeans because she had already memorized the shape of it. She was only the gate clerk until she wasn't. Then she was the person who said no at exactly the right length and volume. And when people tell the story, as they will in rooms built for boredom and rooms built for noise, they make a point of this. No rank. No orders. Still, the lane obeyed her.